Hello, everyone. I am coming to you to tell you that the rest of this podcast will be audio only. So if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, thank you for joining us on the video side. I am normally in my home studio back in Atlanta, but I'm recording this before I leave town. And if you're watching it, that means I do not have the capability technology-wise to record this podcast on video. I am on the road, so my apologies there, but I promise if you keep it locked, you'll hear the intro and then you'll hear my audio only podcast. And in the future, I'll do my best to have as much video as humanly possible. But today's show is just unavoidable. So that's why you only see the blank screen, basically the logo screen. You'll actually hear the audio, but I promise the same content will be there. So please keep it locked. And after the intro, I'll be back with the show.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1333 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Friday evening. And my apologies at the top of the podcast for my remote recording location and audio quality, all that fun stuff. I am in a hotel on the road. Kind of going to happen every once in a while. Not a ton, hopefully, this season, but that's part of the nature of the beast. And today's episode is, by the way, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And I also want to thank you for listening to the podcast at the top of the show and making us your first and listen each and every day. Check us out across podcast platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and on the video side, we are on YouTube, so check us out there as well. Today's podcast, we'll dive into what became a 108-98 victory for the Atlanta Hawks. Probably a little bit shorter of a show in some respects, but still plenty to get into in this game. And it wasn't always pretty, honestly, for Atlanta. They had a pretty ugly first quarter in particular. They did win the last three quarters of this game, but it was back and forth. The Hawks did trail at times in the fourth quarter of this contest. A nice finishing kick to this one to kind of put things away, outscoring the Magic by a 28-17 score in the fourth quarter for a 10-point win and a cover for Atlanta, but it was not easy, let's just say. I think neither one of the games, honestly, both on Wednesday and Friday against overmatched opponents at home, you would have hopefully thought that the Hawks were going to kind of cruise a little bit more. They were the better team on both nights, but still, we'll get into kind of all the nuances that are out there. But the Hawks are 2-0 at this point. That's a nice place to be after two games, and we'll dive into what transpired on this evening. For some pregame kind of context here, the Orlando Magic are not in the greatest position, but they do have a lot of talent. They did lose their opener to Detroit on Wednesday, and they project to say a team that's probably going to be in the tanking race at some point this season. But they were pretty frisky defensively last year. They have some pretty good defensive talent on this roster. They already have, of course, the number one overall pick in Paolo Banchero. They have Franz Wagner back for another season. They have Wendell Carter Jr. They have some pretty good talent on this roster. I will say, the Hawks were almost at full strength again in this one. Bogdanovich still remains out, but he was the only guy on the injury report for Atlanta. The Magic were missing Markelle Fultz and Gary Harris and John Isaac, as well as Mo Wagner. And BetOnline, our friends over there, made the Hawks about 8.5 or 9-point favorites in this game. Again, the Hawks were trailing and not covering that spread for most of the night, but they had that nice kick at the end to get over the hump on that one. But anyway, generally speaking, I would say had the Hawks lost at home to the Magic, that would be in the bad loss column almost no matter what, especially with the Magic not like going crazy. Every once in a while in the NBA, you'll have a night where the opponent, even if it's a bad team, it takes 53s and makes 23 of them, and you just can't win that way. But Orlando was winning this game in the fourth quarter while not having any of that kind of outlier shooting, and that was kind of maybe a little bit concerning for Atlanta. But they, of course, finished strong and overcame that potential hiccup. At the outset, though, it was really DeAndre Hunter is the only guy early in this game that really had anything going on offense. He had the first 6 points for Atlanta, quick 8 points overall, and not a whole lot else going well for the Hawks. In fact, they were 4-15 from the floor to start this game. They had 11 points in like 8.5 minutes or so. Neither team was really getting to the rim much in the first quarter. I think Capella was part of that on the defensive side for the Hawks. I think Wendell Carter Jr. was really good defensively for the Magic in this game. And the Hawks were also kicking the ball all over the floor in this one. Ball security is usually a huge strength of this Hawks team for the last couple of seasons, especially last year. They were number one in the league in turnovers. Tonight, not a whole lot of ball security really for this team. McMillan said after the game that he kind of noted that they didn't love that part of the contest and there was some sloppiness. I agree with that. I will say Collins is also giving some support to Hunter. He was really good in this game, but I think he was probably being defended with a little bit more vigor in this one by the Magic than he was by the Rockets on Wednesday, because Houston's defense was pretty bad in watching that game once again. But rotationally, there was one tweak in this game that I want to at least touch on here on the podcast. It was the same 4 guys off the bench in this game, and generally the same tenets, and that, Trey's been playing the entire first quarter, the entire third quarter. They bring DeJounte back in the second and fourth. That's a pretty logical rotation. It's also what the Hawks have been doing. But there was one change that happened in both halves, actually. And it seemed like, actually, there was a chance that Nate McMillan was just kind of mad at Onyeka Okongwu in the first quarter and took him out pretty quickly after a weird defensive mistake against an ATO. But the reason it seems like now is probably going to be pairing Clint Capella and Trae Young together more, because in both halves, Okongwu played a very short stint when he came in for Capella the first time. They went back to Capella for the last few minutes of that first and third quarter, and then went back to Okongwu again for second and fourth. Usually the last couple of years, the Hawks have kind of gone to longer stints. It's been Capella to open the game, of course, then Okongwu kind of late first, early second, and then Capella again to close the quarter and close the half. This time around, there was two very short stints for Okongwu. In fact, the second one in the second half was about 1 minute long. That's a weird rotation, but it seems like, and this is kind of logical if you think about it, I think Trae is a better partner with Clint Capella. They have good chemistry, Capella's screening, all that stuff, and then you kind of have a little bit more speed on that Murray-Okongwu unit on the second unit. So that does make sense as a pairing and a structure, but it's definitely a little bit challenging to kind of form the rotation that way. It seems like the tact might be moving forward, at least it was on this night, to have Okongwu kind of play one very short stint and then come back in, play a little bit longer in the second and fourth quarters. Aaron Holiday was the last guy in for the Hawks in this one, sort of chronologically, but it was Jalen Johnson again played in the fewest minutes, followed by Holiday, and then Okongwu and Justin Holiday played a little bit more in this one off the bench. Orlando, though, trailed by 8. The Hawks ended up trailing by 8 at the end of the first quarter. I will say this, it was actually, my friend Kevin Chenard pointed this out on Twitter today, but he noted it, and I saw it on tape as well. The Hawks were getting beat up by illegal screens in this game, including several by Wendell Carter Jr. I am actually very high on Wendell Carter Jr., but he was pretty aggressive, and actually, it's honestly one of those things where the best screeners in the league kind of figure out what they can get away with over the course of a game and kind of exploit that. Carter Jr. definitely did that in this game, and it was kind of maddening if you were a Hawks fan to watch him be able to kind of do whatever he wanted to on those screens, but it was effective, and the Hawks didn't really adjust to that for a while. But the bigger story in the first quarter, I thought, was the Hawks' brutal offense. It was their worst quarter offensively of the season out of the first 8. Obviously not a huge sample size there, but the Hawks scored 19 points on 26 possessions in the first quarter. That's about a 74-ish offensive rating, something like that. They were 7-22 from the floor. They were 1 of 8 from 3, and had 6 turnovers in the first quarter. Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, obviously 2 star-level players, were combined 0 of 7 from the floor with 5 turnovers. Trae took a couple bad shots. He was pretty rough in the first half overall. We'll come back to that in a second. But defensively, the Hawks were really fine the entire game, but they dug a hole in that first quarter because they just could not score effectively. Later in the first half, I will say, just as a sort of an aside, Jalen Johnson, I thought, was not hesitating to shoot threes, which is good. I've kind of questioned the lack of spacing that the Hawks have had, and that was still the case in this game on second units. But Jalen taking those shots is crucial to me. Not hesitating, shooting threes that he's able to get off. Not a great shooter at this stage by any means, but I think he needs to be at least aggressive and kind of hunting his opportunities whenever possible. But the Hawks trailed by as many as 13 points, actually, in the first half of this game. It was a 7-0 run right after that, though, by the Hawks to kind of restock themselves, I guess is the way that I'll put it. The Holidays found some juice offensively. Justin Holiday hit a 3, and then Aaron Holiday had a really nice left-handed floater. Then DeJounte Murray kind of took over a little bit. He had this great sequence where it was a bucket by him, then a steal, and then a dunk right back to back to back. And the steal was just kind of vintage DeJounte Murray from the weak side, kind of a sneak attack from behind. Gets the steal. He's opportunistic. He finishes in transition. And I think he realized that Magic don't really have great on-ball creation stuff with their current units, at least from their guard play. So I think he was a little bit more aggressive as the game wore on. The Hawks had 10 steals on the whole, and Murray had 4 of them, which is not shocking because he's very, very good at that. But it was nice to see that. By the way, another sort of aside, but John Collins made his first 3-point attempt of this game and was 3 of 4 in the game. So he is now, I believe, 5 of 6 for the season. At one point in this game, basically the Hawks had gone as a team, non-Collins division, 7 of 36 from 3 for the season. And Collins was 3 of 3 at that point. But anyway, it's just one of those things that happens, and he's been really good so far. Turnovers, again, a notable issue throughout. And I know I said this a second ago, but Trae Young was really bad in the first half of this game. Now, he ends up the night with 25 and 13, so nobody really cares, nor should they. And he was awesome at times in the second half, but I think it was one of his worst halves in a while offensively. He was 0 of 7 from the floor, 0 of 5 from 3, 3 turnovers. Did have 8 assists because Trey is really good at passing and just kind of gets assists, but he definitely was struggling and kind of forcing the issue a little bit too much. I thought some bad shots from Trey, especially even by Trey standards, just some forces with no rhythm. And he has the green light, as he obviously should. If you're a new listener, I'm not picking on Trey Young. It's that he obviously has different rules in some respects offensively, but he was a little bit pressing, I thought, in that first half, and settled it a little bit later on. He did draw a nice charge, though, defensively on Jalen Suggs in that first half. I think in general, he's been sticking his nose in defensively so far, having some off-ball issues, of course, and some transition issues, as he always does defensively, but he's been pretty pesky, I think, by his standards so far this season. Anyway, the Hawks were back within 4 at the end of the first half. That was pretty fortunate after the way they played offensively. They had a 94 offensive rating in the first half. That's pretty tough. They had 12 assists and 9 turnovers. That's an ugly ratio for this Hawks team. And Collins was the only guy that had double figures. He had 13 at the halftime break. Defensively, it was pretty good. We'll come back to that more often in the second half of this podcast. But they had some trouble with Cole Anthony, who actually was on the injury report with illness, ended up with 17 points in the first half, at 25 off the bench. He was really their only guy that had it going for Orlando. But other than that, the Hawks were pretty frisky defensively the entire game, and that was able to sort of raise the baseline of what they're doing. We'll have more on all of those dynamics in place in this game, offensively, defensively, takeaways, individual breakdowns, etc. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. And football season is continuing at this point in time, and BetOnline is the number one source for all the pro and college football needs that you might have in the betting world this season. Find all the latest developments and the game matchups and the news and the podcast at BetOnline. That includes all of what you need for the upcoming weekend slate in both college and pro football. BetOnline is also the top source for wagering information in sports, including live betting and esports and live scores. BetOnline is also fast and easy when it comes to consuming every sport that you have interest in at this point in time. On this podcast, we talk about the NBA and the Hawks, of course. There's plenty to still talk about with the betting markets each and every day, whether it's game lines and over-unders and sides, all that fun stuff, as well as ever-evolving futures when it comes to who's going to win the East and the West and the NBA title this season. All of that is at BetOnline as well. And beyond the NBA, BetOnline has odds and lines on college sports and baseball and MMA, boxing, golf, tennis. They have auto racing, horse racing, soccer, entertainment bets, and much more. Head to BetOnline right now on your mobile device or computer to learn more about all the trends and the action across the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, and obviously the second half was kinder to the Hawks than the first. The Hawks ended up winning the second half, by the way, a final score in that half of 58-44, which is more what you want to see from this Hawks team at home against a pretty shaky Orlando squad. There was a little bit of a hiccup at the outset. Trey committed a turnover on the first possession of the second half against his zone defense by the Magic, but after that it was a 14-6 run by Atlanta to take their first lead in a while. Collins had this awesome coast-to-coast play where he actually got a steal defensively and then took it himself all the way down for a nice dunk in transition. He was comfortable pushing it, which is good to see from Collins. Trey finally made a shot, his first one of the game. It was a 3 for the tie, and then Hunter and Murray got loose as well. They sent sort of Orlando into a timeout mid-quarter, by the way, on a high note as well. Trey hit a 3, and then after a steal by Capella, which was a great play against Paulo Banchero defensively, where he sort of dove on the floor to get the steal, Trey then assisted DeAndre Hunter on a big sweeping dunk down the lane, and he got up for that one a lot. I think Hunter's been playing with a lot of juice so far athletically, which is really good to see. The starters, though, played a lot in the third quarter, longer than usual. They played 8 full minutes because the Hawks were playing so well at that point. But again, they did sort of offset the Okongwu minutes, but a lot of pushing the minutes in this one for the Hawks. We'll come back to that at the end of the podcast. But I believe 3 guys played 36 minutes or more, and all 5 starters 32 minutes or more, and that included Capella playing a lot in this game as well. So definitely sort of a pushing atmosphere from Nate. Obviously, no back-to-back here and no travel, so a little bit more license, I'll say, to play guys a lot of minutes, but they're not holding back, let's say, at this stage. Orlando did lead again, as I mentioned before, late in the third and then into the fourth. There was a pretty bad challenge, I thought, by Nate McMillan at the end of the third quarter. Joe Johnson tried to take a charge, ends up getting called for a block. It was a call that could have been called a charge. It would not have been a terrible call, but in general, like those block charges, they got to be pretty definitive to be overturned. It was a pretty bad challenge, that it was not a high leverage play necessarily, and not one they really had a chance of winning, I think, on the replay. There is some value in giving Jalen Johnson sort of an attaboy for taking a charge. Maybe that's part of that, and maybe some frustration on Nate's part, but regardless, kind of a questionable challenge, let's just say. But after that really rough first quarter offensively, the Hawks were better in the third with that same sort of rotational unit. They shot 50% from the floor in the third quarter. Trey had 17 in the third after that aforementioned slow start that he had in the first half of this game. That's also a top 5 scoring quarter, at least in the third quarter of Trey's career. He's only met or exceeded 17 points in the third quarter, I think 5 or 6 times in his career, so pretty impressive stuff there. Unfortunately, defensively, they were not quite as good in the third as they had been previously, but they found that in the fourth quarter. It was Murray and the bench, as you would expect, in the fourth, but they definitely were aggressive again in the minutes standpoint. They brought Collins in less than a minute into the fourth quarter. As soon as Murray came back in, which he was obviously expected to do, I kind of knew he was going to play 40 minutes in the game because he played 20 in the first half. He sat for only 4 minutes in the second half. It was that one short stint. So he played 40 minutes. That's a lot of minutes for a guy in October, but there you go. Probably more than he needs to play at home against the Magic, but they got the win. Murray and Collins, I thought, were kind of the bigger engines in a 10-2 run that gave the Hawks the lead for the final time. Basically, they led the entire way after that to go up by 4, sort of early-ish in the fourth quarter. They led in like that 5 to 7 range for a while in the third, and then sort of the dagger sequence, I thought, was about 3 minutes to go. Trae Young hits back-to-back threes, basically. The first one was kind of a wild, almost a heave, falling out of bounds that he made in Trae fashion. And the second one was a pull-up in transition. And when that kind of was over, the Hawks went from up 7 to up 13, and it was pretty much over at that point. By the way, Trae had 23 in the second half, 5 assists. He was really good after halftime. And then Orlando, by the way, on offense really could not get anything going. Credit to Atlanta in the second half, but the Magic had 11 points in the first 10 minutes of the fourth quarter. And in the whole quarter overall, they were 5 of 18 from the floor and 5 turnovers for Orlando. So pretty stingy defense for the Hawks on the way to only 17 points down the stretch for the Magic. Moving on from sort of the game flow to some takeaways from this one, plenty to get to actually. The offense was not super pretty. Now, after halftime, it was better, obviously, but a 106 offensive rating for the game is not very good, and this is 2 games in a row where the Hawks have not been terribly efficient against teams that, while Orlando is pretty decent defensively, I think, not elite by any means, and you're still playing at home against a young team. So some stuff to work out there, definitely, on offense. And I think they got a little bit fortunate. They got very hot from 3 in the second half. They were 9 of 13 from 3. That's going to help, obviously, anytime. But the Hawks were about 46.5% on 2s in the entire game. That's not a good number. They took 16 free throw attempts. That's not terrible, and they did make 15 of them, which is a good sign, but not a ton of volume there. 26 assists is solid, but 17 turnovers is way too many. McMillan was not happy about that, nor should he be. That's a number that the Hawks will not be loving at this stage. On the glass, they were just okay, nothing special, and we saw some regression on the mid-range attempts. I talked about this a little bit on the show on Wednesday. The Hawks took the most mid-rangers in the league, basically anything outside of 4 feet, but inside the three-point line. The Hawks had more attempts from that range than any team in the league on Wednesday. It took fewer in this game. It was 36. That was still would have led the league on Wednesday. This time around, though, after being very good on those shots in the opener, they were 9 of 36 on non-paint, on non-rim 2s. So a lot of floater range shots missed. A lot of that was Trey early in the game. He just didn't have it in this spot. Murray not his best either in that spot, but notable for sure. The Hawks were not able to make those 2s, but they were kind of bailed out by getting hot in the fourth quarter and really the entire second half from 3. Definitely a lot more transition stuff, though, pushing the pace. That's probably a good sign for this team, in my opinion. But offensively, they have some stuff to work on for sure, and I'm sure McMillan will have some things to point out in the film session beyond just not making shots. Defensively, like I said, it was pretty good. Orlando is not good on offense. That's worth at least keeping in mind as a caveat here. But they had a 97 offensive rating. You'll take that any day. Against any NBA team, the Hawks doing that, even at home, is very good. The Magic did take almost double the amount of free throw attempts that the Hawks did. They took 30. That's probably more than you would want for sure. But other than that, a lot of positives. They held the Magic to less assists, which was only 16, then turnovers, which was 19 in this game. That's a good foundational principle that led directly to 24 points. That's a good sign. And the Hawks had 26 fast break points. Now, that's a lot of it is pushed by turnover creation, but with Murray in particular, he is speeding things up, both with the steals and the habit creation and also pushing in transition. The lack of a take foul as a rule is pretty nice for the Hawks, I think, at this point in time as well. They're leaning into that. McMillan's not necessarily known for his pace, but the Hawks are definitely always trying to ramp it up a little bit more this season. It's been pretty obvious to this point. And I do like that as a concept. They're not the most athletic team in the world, but they are definitely more bursty now than they have been before without Gallo, without Herter, adding guys like Jalen and DeJounte in particular. And they have a little bit more juice to kind of go end to end like that and use that advantage when possible. So generally speaking, we'll come back to the individual stuff in a second, but it was a game where the Hawks won by 10 points. That's never a bad thing. They did not play fantastically, but they were stingy defensively. And I think through 2 games, generally speaking, again, 2 not great offenses probably, but the Hawks did have shown what they wanted to show on defense. Offensively, we can get into sort of the shooting concerns. They were alleviated a little bit in the second half of this game, but everybody's always asking me now because I've been saying it for so long about the lack of shooting, and those bench units are not great shooting units, and that's, Trey's got less space to operate with. Like, they were basically, I think Glenn Willis pointed this out on Twitter tonight from Peachtree Hoops, a former guest of the show, and probably will be back again in the near future. But you often had guys setting up well beyond the three-point line between Bogey and Herter and Gallinari, and that just kind of creates more space for you, whereas now you got Justin Holiday, who can shoot it, but they're not like deep shooters, and obviously less spacing overall, so it's something to just keep an eye on. And yes, AJ Griffin maybe would be helpful in that realm. I've said it before as well. I know we're going to get that. I'm going to get that sort of string of tweets every night now until he plays, and I get that. But we'll come back to that later on. But generally speaking, a nice solid day at the office, even if the Hawks were not able to sort of play great wire to wire, and they did trail for way too long in this one. They were able to find it at the right time and win by 10 points going away. Okay, we'll have some more individual breakdown stuff in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. All right, some individual breakdown stuff here at the end of the podcast, and the bench was not used a ton in this one. I mentioned before, Jalen Johnson played the least. I think that's going to be the case moving forward. Like he's very clearly the 9th of 9 at this stage, which is fine. 12 minutes, he had 4 points and 1 rebound. 0-2 from 3, but again, I think I like that he took the shots in this one. Still a good transition. He doesn't look comfortable to me right now in the half court on offense, which is not a huge surprise. That's kind of one of the questions I have about him long term even, but I think he's just kind of generally played his role adequately enough. He wasn't quite as good in this one as he was in the opener, I don't think, but he was fine. Aaron Holiday, not a ton on offense, 2 of 3 from the floor, had 4 points and 2 rebounds to go along with 1 assist. But defensively, he has been very useful. I know Nate praised both the Holiday brothers for the defense again in this game. And it's night and day. It's just a different feel to that second unit. Obviously with Murray as the headliner, but the Hawks are just kind of scrapping it defensively. They are doing a lot of little things there. It's not always pretty, but the Holidays, both of them really are just kind of solid in some ways, and defensively they kind of add a lot. I will say Justin Holiday made 3 threes in this game. That was very, very useful. I think 2 of them after halftime. He was 3 of 6. That's kind of what he's going to do on offense. He's not a huge creator really at all, but he will take and he will make enough of them from 3. He's not going to be a 40% guy, I don't think, but you're going to hope he makes 35%, 37%, and he made 50% in this game, 3 of 6. That's very useful. Defensively, he's very, very good and very active and kind of in the right place at the right time. So I thought he was productive and positive in this one, had a steal as well. And then Okongwu played less than he did in the opener. He was not quite as good as he was in the opener. This is a more difficult matchup for him, I think. He went right at Alperen Sengun on Wednesday and with some real good effect. In this one, Wendell Carter Jr. was a little bit more resistant. Mo Bamba is just massive. I don't think Mo Bamba is very good, honestly, at this point, but he is massive. By the way, the Bol units are hilarious for the Magic. He's playing like the 3 at 7'2". It's wild. Anyway, Okongwu was not great. He had 4 fouls, by the way, again in 16 minutes. I'm not trying to pick on that, but every time it seems like Okongwu is going to have 3 or 4 fouls in a short period of time. It doesn't matter right now because he's not playing enough minutes, but if you ever get a Capella injury or something like that, you're going to need Okongwu to figure out how to play for a long stretch without fouling, something to circle. But he was okay. It wasn't like he was bad in this game. Just didn't have as much juice in this one as he did on Wednesday, and maybe that led to Capella playing a little bit more, and also he was pretty good too. Speaking of Capella, we'll go there now. 32 minutes, he had 8 points, 7 rebounds, had 2 steals and a block. Again, like he's a very, very small part of the offense right now, which is fine. I think that I've been calling it for a while, so I can't complain about this. I've been calling for the Hawks to play more through John Collins, and they have for the most part in the last 2 games, and that takes a little bit more away from Capella. And I think it was like, it's noteworthy, like he doesn't really seem to care. I think he's going to anchor your defense. He changed a lot of shots again in this game. I think through two games, he's playing great defensively. Murray's going to get a lot of attention for any sort of turnaround that the Hawks had defensively, and he should. But I think Capella being healthy and being right defensively is huge for Atlanta. That's been very obvious to me so far. And he played sort of a B-plus game, I thought. He was pretty good across the board in 32 minutes. DeAndre Hunter had a better first half than second half. He was kind of the only guy that did, basically. I think he had eight points in a hurry and then ended up with only 12 in the game. But he rebounded the ball reasonably well. 5 rebounds in the first 3 quarters, then he had 1 in the fourth, so 6 overall. 5-12 from the floor. He definitely cooled off. Only 1 assist. No blocks, no steals. So it was kind of a DeAndre Hunter kind of game. Other than rebounding was a positive, generally speaking. But he does look good to me. He looks comfortable. He looks explosive to me athletically, and more positive signs there. If he wasn't like an awesome performer tonight, but I thought he played fine, and it's all he kind of needs to do. And then Collins again was just really, really good. 23 points, 13 rebounds, 3 steals, and a block for Collins in 36 minutes. Only 14 shot attempts. Again, if anything, play through him even more. I mean, 3 or 4 from 3 in this one. He was 6 of 10 on twos. He's just really, really good. Got to the line for 2 of 2. Rebound-wise, just kind of all over the place. Defensively, he kind of had Paolo Banchero struggling at times in this one. He went right through him on offense. It was an interesting test for Collins back-to-back, playing the top, 2 of the top 3 picks in the draft and kind of winning both matchups pretty decisively, honestly. I thought Paolo had a lot of nice moments, but Collins was better in this game, so that's good to see from him. And in the backcourt, we'll go to Murray first. 20 points, 9 assists, 9 rebounds, 4 steals. Obviously a heck of a line there. He had some moments on offense where he was a little bit shaky in the first half, like a lot of guys were, but I thought he played very well again. 40 minutes is a lot, and I will not say otherwise, but he seems to be geared up for it and competitive and wanting to play as much as possible, so no huge complaints. And then Trey, I mentioned before, his first half was just really brutal by his standards, but of course he ends up the game with 25 points, 13 assists, 4 rebounds. 4 of 11 on twos is totally fine. He was just 3 of 13 on, 4 of 11 on threes. He was 3 of 13 from 2. That's really ugly, and he was, again, the biggest contributor to the Hawks being pretty bad in that floater to mid-range in this one. He just didn't have it in this game, but he found it. He had the 2, sort of the put-away sequence where he had the 2 threes in a row, and that's very much on brand for Trey. And he's not been fantastic by his standards the first 2 games, but he could sort of roll out of bed and have 20 and 10, and I think we saw that again in this one. And defensively, like I said before, he's been a little bit pesky in my mind. Not fantastic, but pesky enough. And that's all the Hawks really need from him defensively. So from here, the Hawks have another pretty friendly spot against the Charlotte Hornets on Sunday, actually an early evening game. The Hornets lost at home today to the Pelicans. Now, New Orleans is pretty good, of course, and Charlotte is playing without LaMelo Ball, but they give up 124 to the Pelicans at home in this one. Defensively, they're going to be really bad, I think, this year. They don't have Miles Bridges anymore, nor should they. Miles Bridges probably shouldn't be playing basketball. But without LaMelo, and at least right now, he missed, by the way, him and Cody Martin both missed the game on Friday for the Hornets. He's not been ruled out for Sunday, but he's not played yet, so you kind of have to think he might not play on Sunday. We'll see. But the Hornets are a team that I am definitely fading this year. I think they're going to be pretty not good, even with Melo playing, and he's not playing right now. They don't have really anything in terms of like burst stuff at the forward spots. They have Kelly Oubre is okay. PJ Washington is a solid guy who's a combo big, but they're pretty weak in the front court in general. They have interesting center spot as they have forever now, it seems like, but nothing is assured by any means, but the Hawks are going to be favored again, barring a weird injury thing or something like that between now and Sunday. The Hawks would be very solid favorites again at home. And like we said at the beginning of the season, these first 5 games, you can't assume anything. You don't just assume 4-1, 5-0, but they're 2-0 now, and they should be favored in the next 3 games, and we'll see how they handle all that stuff. I'll be back in the building for the game on Sunday. That'll be nice in some respects after not being able to be there in person today on this Friday. It's always better to kind of watch the game up close and personal if you can at home. So we'll have a full breakdown, as we always do, on Sunday night into Monday. So I definitely recommend you checking out the show once again, and please subscribe to the podcast across platforms, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We should be there. If we're not there, let me know that on Twitter at BT Rowland or at Locked On Hawks, and we'll get you squared away in the near future. I do appreciate all of the support. It's been a big week on the show. This is the 6th episode in about 5.5, 6 days, so it's been a lot of fun diving into the start of the season. 80 more to go, at least, plus the playoffs, etc. So we'll be here the entire way. So thank you for listening. As always, everybody, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you after the game on Sunday.